Welcome everybody to this special conversation with two veterans from two parties and one special guest, Elliot Ackerman. This is a special conversation for me because all three of the guests are very close friends for many years. In terms of run a show, this is a event that we're recording and may share some excerpts publicly. The focus of the conversation is going to be on Afghanistan now, 1 year after the essentially anniversary, for lack of a better term, of the U.S. exodus from Afghanistan. We have two members of Congress that have been actively very involved in Afghan SIV, special immigrant visa issues, as well as many other important areas regarding Afghanistan. They also both happen to be in the most recent book by Elliot Ackerman, The Fifth Act. So in terms of run a show, we will hear from Elliot about a little bit about his book, and then we'll turn to Congressman Seth Moulton and Congressman Peter Meijer. We are all dialing in, I believe, on vacation. I happen to be in a place with some low band connectivity. My RLD, Legislative Director for With Honor, Andy Sullivan, who is a Army veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, may pinch hit if I start losing some connectivity. Now, with that, let me just do a quick brief introduction of each of our special guests here. Elliot and I were midshipmen together way back 20 plus years ago, before September 11th. He led Marines as an infantry officer, including a tour in Fallujah, where he earned the Silver Star. He then went on to serve his country in the CIA, in the ground branch, was very active in Afghanistan throughout all of the work, and has become a really distinguished writer in recent years. He also helped us launch With Honor with a kickoff op-ed in USA Today 4 years ago with Admiral Moulton, who's on our advisory board. This book that we'll hear about is his most recent book. One of his more recent books was one of 5 shortlisted for the National Book Award for fiction. So we're great to have Elliot on. Elliot also has worked and known Congressman Seth Moulton for many years. Seth and I actually went to the basic school together over 20 years ago. We also overlapped in graduate school and share a mentor, David Gergen, who is a co-founder of With Honor. Seth has always impressed me with his service, including service that often is not spoken about. One example of that is after his 4 tours in Iraq, he spent years, not as a member of Congress, but as a student, and then before he ran for office, working to successfully get his interpreter, Mohammed, to the United States, where he ended up teaching Arabic in the United States. It took countless years and an indefatigable effort from Seth to do that. So he's been following these issues and working them hard for many, many years. We teamed up with Seth and Peter Meijer and other members of the 4-country caucus, the 26 members of Congress that With Honor Action works alongside, who are veterans, and have been focused for over 3 years on trying to expand and expedite special immigrant visas for our allies in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we'll hear more about that issue in particular in the conversation to come. So Congressman Peter Meijer, Army veteran, and is a member of the 4-country caucus, also served in a humanitarian capacity in Afghanistan. Both Seth and Peter traveled together to Afghanistan. We may hear a little bit more about that trip as well in the conversation. Without further ado, Elliot, over to you. If you could share with us some of about the book, which is outstanding. Thank you for the galley copy last week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rye. Thanks to you and to With Honor for hosting this, and Peter and Seth, great to be with you guys again, as ever. Well, I guess I'll just start by sort of mentioning the title of the book, The Fifth Act, where that originates from. I think, like many people on this call, and certainly many veterans, last year, we experienced the collapse of Kabul, and as Kabul was falling, my personal network just lit up with everyone that I had served with, whether they were, an American veteran or, Afghans I'd served with, some of whom were still fighting in Afghanistan, some of whom had settled in the United States. But that network lit up with these pleas to get folks out. And also many of the people I was hearing from is, I went on to work as a journalist, so colleagues of mine who were journalists. And when this all happened, just anecdotally, I was watching this sort of, frankly, experiencing it somewhat viscerally, having fought in Afghanistan. And I got a request from a friend of mine, and she runs a pretty successful Substack. And she said, "Hey, listen, Elliot, would you mind writing something for us? I'm gathering a number of people, and they're going to write short 500-word essays. And would you write about Afghanistan?" And at the time, frankly, I really didn't feel like writing. And I said, "Well, what do you want me to write, in 500 words?" And she said, "Well, maybe you could just describe what's happened there, because I feel like a lot of Americans haven't been paying any attention to this issue. And so maybe you could just talk about, what's happened in the last 20 years in Afghanistan." So I sort of laughed and said, "How do you summarize like 20 years of war in 500 words?" And she said, "Well, this whole thing is a tragedy and people don't understand it." And it was that use of the word tragedy that sort of got me thinking of like, how do you put a framework around a 20-year war that fails? And if you look at tragedies, tragedies are traditionally told in 5 acts, like Shakespeare's tragedies are told in a 5-act structure. And this structure goes all the way back to the ancients. And so in my mind, the 5 acts of this tragedy kind of broke down along the presidencies, so Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and then the 5th act, to which the title of the book alludes, is the Taliban, kind of what was happening last summer, and then potentially what comes next, because as much as, we and Americans might feel as though we're done with Afghanistan, I would argue that Afghanistan certainly isn't done with the United States, and possibly we'll talk a little bit about that later. So it's the idea of trying to tell the overarching story of the war, 20 years of war, but then also telling it kind of through the prism of what happened last summer. And so the book is organized across the presidencies and the Taliban, but also, it also tells the story kind of as a memoir of these 5 distinct evacuation cases that I was involved with last summer. And Seth and Peter kind of pop up in a couple of those. And some of those evacuations worked and were successful, and others, had different outcomes. And then, and the last thing I sort of wanted to touch on in the book was this theme that seemed to be running through everything that occurred at the end of the war in Afghanistan. And it is a idea that I think is very near and dear to those of us who serve in the U.S. military, which is this idea of, what does it mean to leave no one behind? We say it all the time, no one left behind, no one left behind. But like, what does that actually mean? Because I felt what I was witnessing last summer very acutely over those weeks was a massive effort of, veterans I knew, and frankly, citizens I knew, trying to make good on that promise of we're not going to leave anyone behind, while knowing that we absolutely were going to leave people behind, that the airport was going to close and not everyone was going to make it. And that idea of, what does it mean to leave no one behind? It's not something that's unique to the U.S. military. I mean, this is an idea that is as old as war and the stories that we tell about war. I mean, if you look at Homer's Iliad, the end of the Iliad is Achilles kills Hector and drags his body back to his camp. And the last scene of the Iliad is Hector's father, King Priam of the Trojans. Basically the book ends with him pleading for his son's body, so to not leave someone behind. So the book kind of gets in, it gets into the politics, it gets into the case, these 5 cases at the airport. But for me, I wanted to also write about a time in Afghanistan where I struggled to know whether or not I had done right by this code of leaving no one behind. And so I write a little bit about an ambush I was involved with in 2008. And it was a memory, frankly, that last summer really was dredged up for me. I started questioning myself again about whether or not I had made good on that in the past and whether I would make good on that in the future. And I really wanted to write about that idea of leaving no one behind, because I think for a lot of veterans, we were all sort of sucked back into the war in a very visceral way last summer. And I think that's left some marks in the year that's followed. So So yeah, I'll just close with that. That is basically the book.
Thanks, Elliot. Great way to kick off the conversation. And while you were speaking, we had one of our donors who's on the call offer to buy and send books to anybody that's on this call who would like one. So if you'd like a book, please send me an email and we'll get you a copy in whatever format you'd like. Seth, there's so many questions that I could ask given how much you've worked this issue. Maybe just could you share with us your perspective on working on Afghanistan, tirelessly working on SIV issues, and the comments that Elliot made.
Sure. Well, right. First of all, it's a great honor to be on here with you. So thank you for organizing this. I don't like it when you mentioned that it was over 20 years ago we were at TBS, because that seems like a frighteningly long time ago. But otherwise, it's been an enjoyable discussion so far. Peter, it's always great to be here with you. Of course, share the disappointment of, I can imagine, just about everyone on this call that you're not going to be joining us in Congress yet next year, because you've been a true public servant in the best meaning of the term. You're someone who's actually shown tremendous political courage at a time when that's not politically advantageous. And it's something that we desperately need more of in Washington and in our country writ large. So it's the nation's loss that you've lost your primary, and I'm sure it won't be the last we hear from you. But it's been an honor to serve with you, and none of it's been and no greater honor than traveling with you to Kabul to do our job when the U.S. government was failing to do its job, I think, writ large last year. And then Elliot, I mean, look, if anyone on the call hasn't read the book yet, it's a great book. And I'm too honest to not admit that I haven't finished it yet, but it's very hard to put down. Elliot, thank you for your incredible service, not only to the country in uniform, but to all of us veterans, by finding a way to put into words what so many of us feel and struggle with on an almost daily basis coming out of these wars. So what do I think? First of all, Ryan mentioned that I've been working for years to get numerous people, I mean, including just a half dozen of my own interpreters, Mohammed being the first, out of Iraq. And it's because I think every one of us who's served with allies overseas can tell you, you put your lives in these people's hands. They put their lives in yours. And they have done so much more for our country than the vast majority of Americans. Just think about that. Mohammed and all the others, they're not just Iraqi or Afghan heroes, they're American heroes. And we got them to work for us, and we kept them working for us because we promised them. I mean, I will never forget the day when I was a mere 23 years old, and Mohammed came up to me and said, I can't work for you anymore. Insurgents came to my house last night. They threatened my family. I can't keep doing this job and watch my family members get killed. And when that happened, I wasn't quite sure how to respond, but I knew our mission was important. And so I made a case to him that it was worth the risk. But I also made a promise to him. And I said, if you need us to come to your house and protect your family, we will. If you need us to get you weapons, if you need me to live in the attic, I'll find a way to make it happen. When Mohammed went home that day, I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. But the next morning, he showed up at our gate at the same time he always did. In the morning after that, he showed up again. In the morning after that, he showed up because he believed fundamentally in America, but he also believed very personally in me. And that's the commitment that we made to all of these amazing allies, some interpreters, some civil servants, some fellow warriors who risked their lives at our side. And I just think that a lot of people don't get that. I think a lot of people in the administration don't get it. I think a lot of people in previous administrations didn't get that. And the result is very much the tragedy. There's no better word for it that Elliot has described. I think there's another fundamental question that all of this dredges up, which is, was it even the right decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in the first place? I think by many measures, you could seriously question that decision today. And, you know, perhaps we could get into that debate. I'd be delighted to. But once the Biden administration had made the decision to continue on the plans the Trump administration started to withdraw, those of us in Congress who understood what was going on there started pleading with them, first behind the scenes, then very much in public, a very public hearing with Milley and Austin, where I started, my very first question was, Mr. Secretary, why have you not begun this evacuation already? And that was in June. That was in June. Had they started early, we would not be in the situation we are today. The situation we're in today is unbelievably tragic. And I'll leave off there. Thanks.
Seth, thanks so much for sharing that, both substantive as well as personal perspective on this. Peter, over to you. You know, welcome your reflection on Seth and Elliot's comments, and then maybe we can start orienting towards what is happening now and what can be done for our Afghan allies in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Always a pleasure to be with Elliot and see him again, and obviously Seth as well. We've certainly shared some memories. And I will just say I'm not dead yet. No need for mourning, though I will not be returning to 118th, but the mission goes on. And I think that was one of the really overarching themes, and you heard this with both Elliot and Seth, is that the mission is continuing here, that just because we have no longer have a physical presence in Afghanistan doesn't mean that our moral obligation to make right by those to whom we made promises, that doesn't continue. You know, I know Seth and I and Elliot and I we were all talking, you know, just 370 days ago. I remember the first, after that was a Sunday, the 15th of August, when Kabul fell, but for the prior week, there had been, you know, first it was Zaranj out in Nimruz, that provincial capital fell, not a massive shock, but then Herat fell pretty quickly thereafter. And that was a huge trend. And as somebody who had covered, who had worked out of our office when I was on the NGO side in Herat, who had my initial responsibility was covering the southern Afghanistan region, all those provinces from Nimruz over to Kandahar for the NGO community, and up to Ghazni and closer to Khost. You know, it was like watching something in slow motion that we had feared. And by slow motion, I mean like day 1, day 2, day 3, but knowing exactly that the ship is turning into the iceberg. And, you know, it would have been great if you would have had enough lifeboats, you know, prior, right? And I think that was the biggest frustration that many of us felt. You know, Seth talked about that call we had with State, you know, our 4-country caucus group that got together starting back in April, saying if we're going to leave, let's make sure to do this right and you know, not take any assumptions here. So ultimately, you know, the first week of the collapse, you know, it was all phone calls to friends saying, how the hell are you and who are you trying to get out, you know, within the veterans community. And we were able to get a lot of folks out, you know, but and you get this from reading Elliot's book, which I strongly encourage. He's not only one of the best post 9/11 writers, you know, but also easily the most prolific, and his writing stamina and determination is enviable, if not otherwise impossible. But you got that realization that it was multiple different points, right? I mean, it was the folks at the gates, it was the people getting people on planes, but it was also all the coordinating mechanisms that had to come, you know, left of that, you know, gate crossing to get somebody into the airport and then to get them out. And now we have both that ongoing challenge with all of the DoD affiliated individuals who are not evacuated and the question of the folks who are in the US, how do we make sure that we adjust their status? And so the Afghan Adjustment Act, which I think both Seth and I were original co-leads on, and there was a partnered effort in the Senate, similar as what happened after Haiti, after Cuba, after Vietnam. We'd had similar adjustments of status for those who are in the US. I won't get into the technical details on the State Department side, but that's needed in order to put the folks who are in the US on a pathway towards being stabilized, being able to work, and being able to fulfill and make good on promises that we had made to them when they worked for us. And then also continuing that pipeline of folks who we were not able to evacuate during those frantic 14 days at Kabul airport. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Rye, and thank you for gathering us together.
Thanks, Peter. So you mentioned the Afghan Adjustment Act, which is really focused on enabling the Afghans that did get to the United States to be out of effectively a legal limbo that prevents many of them from even working. We have a lot of allied organizations that we teamed up with that are on the call, IAVA, No One Left Behind, Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, and we may hear from Susanna Cunningham in a moment from Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. But as outside organizations, we've really tried to amplify the work that both of you have done in Congress across bipartisan lines to do more for our Afghan allies, including the estimated 300,000 when you can include dependents, which is of course something that is done in humanitarian situations, that are still in Afghanistan, according to a recent survey that this group called the EOA Coalition put together. And so we're faced with a situation where we need to do right by those that are currently in the United States, as well as those that are still trapped in Afghanistan, and frankly, a context where you just don't have public attention anymore on this issue. And so I'm going to get to the how you can help a little bit earlier in the call. The how you can help is to not buy a book, because you don't need to buy a book. We're going to give you a copy of the book, but then give that copy to someone else, or buy another copy and give it to someone else. Why? Because this is one of the only books that's actually prompting a discussion that needs to still be in the public sphere. And we can do this as a country. It is not a large number overall of folks that that could come here and be incredible citizens, incredibly loyal citizens, as Seth spoke to. So on that note, what I'd like to do is ask Susanna Cunningham from Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, who's helped form this coalition with Honor Action and other veteran service and humanitarian organizations, to give us a quick overview from your perspective, please, Susanna, about what is the status of the Afghan Adjustment Act that was introduced in a bicameral, bipartisan way last week? What needs to happen to get it passed? And are there other immediate practical steps that can get done across party lines that with Honor Action and this coalition that you've helped put together can push on from the outside? Susanna.
Here is in no small part to With Honor and the extraordinary partnership you have been consistent with on evacuating allies, on continued relocation efforts, and to ensure that Afghans who got here to safety receive lasting protection. When you look at what the four-country caucus and its members have done, I mean, Congressman Seth Moulton and Congressman Don Bacon, now chair, introduced the Welcome Act last fall, which secured resettlement services for Afghans who would otherwise have been ineligible for services and left to fend for themselves. And Congressman Peter Meijer and Congressman Jason Crow are both original bill sponsors for the bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act in the House, which is a complement to the Senate bill by Senator Graham and Klobuchar, among 6 bipartisan co-sponsors. So I can't express my gratitude. This is a pivotal time for this bipartisan piece of legislation. We hope to see it move in September. There's going to be a unique opportunity, led by the Senate, really to push for this to move and represent and reflect in on the Hill what we see on the ground, which is the nonpartisan nature of this work. The evacuation was nonpartisan. We didn't ask your party when you asked us if you knew a way to get allies out. And I can't say enough about the the work here with leaders to ensure that the American handshake means something. And that also in this bill, Representative Meijer and our partners really secured to make sure that amongst this lasting protections for Afghans who got here, that the administration is forced to create an interagency task force for continued relocations for those left behind, that there is congressional oversight for how they're processing SIVs, that there's an expansion that Afghan military members who worked along joint efforts in Afghanistan along with the US and NATO forces also are going to be eligible as our allies. So there's just a really extraordinary amount. And we're sort of looking to see this bill moved in September, and we'll need to get to 60 votes in the Senate. And I think we've got, I think we've got House members. We're having new Republicans join every day. We think we'll get a big contingent of the Democrats in the House, and we're really looking to our Senate leads and Senate Republicans. We know that there are a number who said, come back to us when you got to introduce. So happy to see you have a Senate Judiciary member, and we hope to see that move forward. And there is an opportunity for With Honor if Evacuate Our Allies, for which LIRS is one of the members, is going to have a congressional virtual fly-in for people to meet. And for many of the people who served in Afghanistan, whether in the diplomatic corps, intelligence, or the military, to say, this to me means keeping our promise. This means that you are my brother. This means I will protect you, and that the handshake from us and from our government means something.
Susanna, thanks so much. And this is a conversation that could go on for a long time, preferably over drinks, because there's a lot of heavy material in here, as we heard with Elliot and Seth and Peter kicking us off. But we keep these to 30 minutes, and we like to be punctual. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying a couple things. The first is, we have a motto, and frankly, the last 3 years have made me question our motto. The motto is principles before politics. Why have I questioned it? Because too often you don't see that. Even among the coalition of veterans, too often you do not see that. Everything is through a political lens. The tribalism is fierce. Well, this is an example of an issue where both Congressman Moulton and Peter Meijer have demonstrated courage. They wouldn't say that because they're just doing the right thing for those that stood behind us in some of the most dangerous work possible and imaginable, not only for themselves, but for their families who were often targeted. So they wouldn't use the word courage for what they've done, but that's what it is. Peter Meijer took a lot of heat on his right flank for introducing the Afghan Adjustment Act. That's just where our politics is right now. That's why we waited, in part, that's why we waited over a year before introducing it to this moment. When Seth Moulton traveled to Afghanistan, the amount of, junk that was getting thrown his way from the left was out of control. I mean, it was vociferous, but he did it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what they both have done. And so I'm really, I would just want to underscore that moment. We have an actual principles before politics moment. It's right here. It's right now in this issue. It could use your help more so than many of our other calls. This is one that you who are listening to this call can actually affect. Very few people are paying attention and actively working this. This is an issue that needs to be actively worked. So please get a copy of Fifth Act, pass it along, engage on this issue, tell others about it. Do not let it just sleep and fall away, because it can. And there are tens of thousands of lives that are on the line, many of whom are in the United States, and hundreds of thousands more who are in Afghanistan. I wish you all the best. I hope you're having a good summer. Let's keep at it. Susanna, thanks to you for joining us. Thanks for your tireless efforts, which we've seen in this coalition, and we'll keep at it. All the best.